Are knights the strongest piece in chess? Well, they're personally my favorite piece in chess. But in this video, I'm going to show you why knights have the potential to be the strongest or one of the strongest pieces on the board. And I will say, obviously, in a vacuum, it's the queen and even the rook is stronger. Even the bishop is stronger than the knight in a vacuum. And that's the crazy thing about knights, is that in a vacuum, they're not the strongest piece on the board, but within the context of the position, the knight can be the most powerful piece on the board. And I'm going to show you why that is the case in this game. And I'm also going to say that the better you become with knights, because the knights are so tricky and they move in such an unorthodox manner and they're so unique, the better you become at chess. It's easy to master the bishop. You can master the bishop almost immediately. The queen, the pawns, the rooks, they're very straightforward. No pun intended. But the knights, since they move in such a weird L shape and they can hop over pieces, this is the piece you want to focus on to master and appreciate, and you will skyrocket your rating in chess as long as you're taking care of every other thing like tactics, strategy, openings, etc. Anyway, we're going to see the power of the knight right away. And my opponent, who's rated 2,000, who's also, by the way, have to throw this in there, his name is Chess Ninja. All the stars must have been aligned today. I mean, Chess Samurai versus Chess Ninja, 2,200 versus 2,000. I mean, I don't know. Crazy, right? So anyway, my opponent demonstrates, because he's a good player, how strong a knight could be. And already he has a much better position than me. I'm not sure how he got that. I let him get that position already, but he has a very good position. Now, what happens here is the evaluation is actually like +2 in favor of white here because of his great knight. Now, my job is to chop off this knight somehow, maybe attack the pawn base somehow. He can always replace this pawn with this pawn, though. So I have to be patient and methodical and try to get rid of this pawn and then get rid of the knight. However, my opponent makes some strategic errors in this game that I want to go over. So this video is also not just showing the power of the knight, but also strategy, because when you learn the power of the knight, you're also getting good at strategy. It's a very strategic piece, the knight, and I'll explain in a few moves. Okay, so my opponent's stopping me from coming here. Again, everything's kind of revolving around the knights in this game, and that's because it's a closed position. If it's open position, you'll see the bishops get more activity, but the knights are going to be able to maneuver better in closed positions. So I start to chop away at this pawn chain, and I'll show you where my opponent makes the mistake. Right here, my opponent makes a drastic mistake, and going from +2 to an even game just because he got rid of the knight. Now, the knight is there for a reason. It's a great piece. You want your knight to ideally be on the 6th rank and anchored by a pawn, and it's just ideally placed. So to get rid of this for a piece that wasn't even developed yet and wasn't doing anything and wasn't going to get into the game anytime soon is a huge strategic blunder. And we want to avoid tactical blunders, but we also want to avoid strategic blunders. He should have just chilled and waited and played something else, anything, maybe just develop. If I take, he just replaces it with this pawn. If I take, that doesn't do anything, and he still has a knight here, and I still have to figure out a way to get rid of this pawn so I can then chop off the knight, or at least maybe come back here and attack the knight there. The thing is, he's going to replace this knight with another piece, but at least it's not going to be a knight. So anyway, he makes a drastic mistake. So So after I play this, he takes, and then after I take, now it's an even position already, just because he got rid of that good knight. And you'll see it later on in the game. I'm not going to be so nice when my knight gets to a good position, and I'll show you what I mean. Here I decided to take with the pawn. Why did I take with the pawn here? I don't want my pawn to be isolated, so I didn't want to take with the queen. I didn't want to take with the rook either for that same reason, so I took with the pawn to keep these guys close together. You might be saying I left my king open, but I'm going to tuck my king in the corner if I have to and put my rook here maybe. That's potential. So this is actually strong, and it's protecting a lot of key squares since the pawns are together. So, okay, my opponent makes a nice central move. And now my rook wasn't doing anything, so notice how I put my rook into the center in an open file. And also a bonus, I'm attacking his queen. I get a tempo. He moves out of the way, and now you'll see I start to already at this point attack because I developed, right? Because we want to develop first in chess. We want to get all our pieces into the game. I'm castle developed. I gotta start to look to improve my pieces. Now, you'll see when we look to improve our knights or plan to put our knights on certain squares, what do? And I read this somewhere in a chess book. I forget what chess book it is, so I can't really reference it. But it's almost you want to take the knight, pick it up, and if you could just pick up the knight and put it anywhere on the board, where would you put it right now? So that's the first step. And that's right here. So you should see that this is a strong square for the knight. It's anchored by a pawn. There's a hole right here. There's nothing that can really challenge the knight, at least right away, or at least without losing material. So you want your knight there. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how do you get there? From here, you would have to get from here to this spot, and then from here. So basically, the route the knight wants to take here is knight c5 and then knight d3. So in this case, I just went to c5, planning to come here. This pawn is protected by this knight. And now my opponent goes and starts to try to desperately chop off the knight or knights. But here I just jump into knight d3. I'm too fast. Here you can argue he should have just chopped off this knight because this knight's going to come also into the game. But here he developed the rook. It looks like a decent move. And right now I don't really have too much of an advantage, but it's a slippery slope. Notice how I'm not going to get rid of this knight, even if I could right now. I'm going to keep it there as long as possible until I have to move it. So right now everything is okay. Now it's about using this knight and using other pieces in conjunction with this knight to put a lot of pressure on white. So here I use my other knight to come into the game. And now I'm attacking this pawn twice, as you'll see. And now when you put pressure on your opponent, a lot of times they self-destruct. So like the cure is worse than the disease type of thing. And their defense, like whatever they do, they're actually I have an advantage. So they're in a disadvantaged position. But the way they defend often makes it even worse for them because it's hard to defend in chess, especially when you're getting pressured. So he didn't want to lose the pawn, so he moved the pawn. And because of that, he opened up an even worse threat, which was allowing my knight to come into c3 and fork the queen and the rook. My opponent has to protect his queen, so he moved his queen out of the way, and now he's attacking my knight. I would love to keep this knight here too. The problem is it's not anchored. If I had it anchored by a pawn, that would be great, and that's why we want our knights ideally anchored by pawns. So I can't keep it here, unfortunately. However, I can take the rook, so I'm going to cash in. If my knight was anchored, and this is what I mean by the knights being so strong, that if my knight was anchored by a pawn here, in other words, it was defending the queen attack, I might not even take the rook. I might keep my knight there. That's how strong the knight is in these situations. So, and anyway, I can't, so I cashed in, so to speak, and I won material. My opponent took back, and now I played b5. b5 is just protecting this pawn. So this is the pawn that's anchoring my knight. White's attacking that pawn. If this goes, my whole position drops, basically, because my whole position is revolving around the knight being on d3. So I protect this. Now this pawn that's anchoring my knight is protected by this pawn, which is protected by this pawn. So if he wanted to undermine this knight and this whole anchor, he would have to get to this pawn. Now, of course, you can say now he's going to chop off the knight with the bishop, but again, we already won material based on where our knight was, and I also have a plan for this. I'll show you in a sec. So he attacks the knight. Now, the problem here is my knight can't escape because all the squares are taken. He's also threatening to win a pawn. So what do you do here? This is tactics. I played the best move here, the only move really to play, and that's to keep the advantage, and that's c5. Now, c5 is a really nice move because, well, let's say he takes with the pawn, right? I just come back and take with the knight, and now, no, my knight's not there anymore, but again, the knight being there did its job. We won the rook exchange. We won material. We're better already, and now the knight is coming back. We're not losing any material. We're not giving any material back. We're not dropping a pawn. If he takes, we would just take with check. Everything is fine here. Not to mention we have a passed pawn. Okay. So again, he takes with the bishop. Same thing. We take with the knight. Takes with check. And the interesting thing about this, the really cool thing about this is, which I had to calculate here, is let's say he takes the knight. Now I take, he takes, I take. This was the only variation I was concerned about, but I was concerned about not him taking back, but this in-between move, bishop takes c5, hitting my queen, hitting this rook, and this rook being attacked. However, it doesn't work because of the simple move queen d7. And now he just drops another piece, drops a whole piece by doing this, because now this doesn't even work. Because even if it did, I mean, I would just take. But even worse than that is we have check, and then the king has to come to the second rank, and then we have check, winning the queen. So for that reason, that whole variation doesn't even work. My opponent's a strong player, so when I did play c5, he had to calculate that. He took some time, and he actually played c5 here. I took back, and then he goes to attack the pawn. He probably should have just taken the knight at this point because the knight is such a problem for him. But I defended the pawn, and now he comes to f2 with his queen. So the whole idea is he really wants to get rid of the knight, which he could have. He could have traded it, but since he's down material, he just trying to actually win the piece outright. Now, if I come here, that's not a bad move by any means. That's good, but I mean, you know, I got a passed pawn and everything, and I get rid of the bishop pair. But he was so concentrated on getting rid of this knight, and he was so concentrated on, because he's a good chess player, of this knight coming to a good square again, d3, and this happening, that he actually opened up f4. So he was on c2, defending e4, and now he comes to f2, and now I simply just take on e4, and my opponent here actually resigned. He just had too much. Now, why did he resign? Well, he's down enough material, a lot of material at this point. I have a passed pawn. It's not looking good. I'm attacking his queen, so I'm getting a tempo here. But let's just say he came out. He avoided the. He doesn't want to get his queen taken, so he attacks my knight. I would just anchor it now on e4, and now my knight is anchored on e4. And now this is a really hard knight to get rid of. He would have to. The bishop can't come here to get rid of the knight because the pawn. He would have to do all these sorts of maneuvers to get rid of the knight, and come here to try to get rid of the knight. And by that time, and this is why I'm going to show you another example of why the knight is stronger than the rook. And it can be a really strong piece when it's well placed. I don't want to give up the knight. I would probably even play rook d3 in this position. And the point is, if he comes here now, I just take the bishop and protect my knight. And you could say, well, he could take your rook. Well, that's my point. I don't mind. Now there's no piece that can take my knight. And the only piece that could take my knight without losing a ridiculous amount of material is the rook, but that's still losing material in itself. So my knight is excellently placed. I get a passed pawn out of it. I'm going to put my rook behind this passed pawn if he tries to take it. And now I just have all the play in this position. And, you know, I could even take, I could put my queen here. The whole idea is I would have something like, let's just say like this. And I have a passed pawn, an excellent knight. And that is why, just one example of many examples I can give you from many games of why the knight, if it's well placed, can be the most powerful piece on the board and can totally, completely hamper and hinder your opponent's plans and just stifle their whole position. Anyway, hopefully you found this game helpful. If you did, check out this one. I'll catch you guys next time. Go play some chess.